Are you a man looking for an intensive program to help you overcome your sexually addictive behaviors? Gateway to Freedom is your answer. Gateway to Freedom is a 3-day intensive workshop for men seeking to overcome sexually addictive behaviors. Whether married, single, or divorced, Gateway to Freedom will help men regain hope for a new life of purity and real contentment. The workshop is conducted by experts in the field of sexual addiction recovery. Your experts have over 35 years of combined experience. Read testimonials of workshop alumni at gatewaymen.com. Get all the info and register online at gatewaymen.com or call 1-800-49-PURITY.
Hi, my name is Jonathan, and I'm the founder of the Gateway to Freedom workshop. I want to personally invite you to be part of our next workshop coming up July 24th through the 26th in Colorado. So call us today at 1-800-49-PURITY or visit gatewaymen.com.
Welcome to Pure Sex Radio, training men, educating women. Are you ready to get real and start living each day in purity? This dynamic program is designed to educate, encourage, and equip listeners with the tools necessary for living a life of sexual purity. Pure Sex Radio brings you the best in mobile talk radio. Listen to real-life struggles, learn how to overcome lust, pornography, and sex addiction, and get serious about purity.
Good day, radio listeners. Welcome to this week's edition of the Pure Sex Radio broadcast. I'm glad you decided to join us. This is a first in a series that I did on grace-based purity parenting at a church recently that I'd like to share with you in hopes that it will help you as parents to navigate your child through the adolescent years as they face various temptations, but to do it in a way that's founded on grace and truth. Enjoy. Parenting is not easy, right? I mean, parenting takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of endurance, patience. It's really not for the weak, right? Problem is, we're weak. And that's what makes it even more challenging. So I want us to just start this whole conversation here kind of on the same turf. That the reality is that we need to admit to some degree that we don't know what we're doing. You know, kind of if you think about it, whatever ages your children are right now, it's the first time you've had them at that age. So there's an ignorance to it. We don't know what we're doing. It's like it's the first time you've had a 15-year-old. It's the first time. And even if you've had another 15-year-old before them, it's the first time you had that 15-year-old be 15 years old. So there's this ongoing like learning process that we're constantly being reminded that we don't know what we're doing. And I think we just need to go ahead and embrace that. And it doesn't mean that we don't try to glean advice from other people. It doesn't mean that we don't try to understand the principles that God has laid out for how we are to train our children up. But I think it sets the tone for how we're going to engage those insights. It sets us up for realizing, hey, even if somebody gives me this great nugget that I can run with and it really works with my 16-year-old daughter, it totally flopped with my 14-year-old son. And kind of we just are able to breathe a little bit and say, it's okay that we don't know what we're doing. If you put the next slide up there, I just want to share with you a little bit of my story because I believe everyone has a story. And it's important for us to be able to share it openly. And I come from a background where I was part of this church as a kid. I grew up in this church. My dad was an elder here at this church. And so I was every time the doors were open, we were here, we were doing something. And I was an active kid in the youth group. And yet, at 12 years old, I was introduced to pornography. And it was something I didn't know how to handle. I didn't know what to do about that. It scared me, and I didn't tell anybody about it. Because a lot of times, as a preteen or as an early teenage kid, We don't have a clue about sexuality. We don't have a clue about the things that want to try to destroy us sexually. And so porn is one of those things that can almost seamlessly kind of come into a little boy's life. And he doesn't recognize the dangers. All he knows is, I don't know what to do with this. And that was me. But all throughout junior high and high school, I spent those years growing in my addiction, my secret addiction to pornography. And so all throughout those years, nobody knew what I was doing. If anybody had come to this church and looked at my activity in the youth group and things like that, they would have said, wow, righteous kid, check that box. But that's just it. Sometimes what we see on the outside isn't what's really going on the inside. Now, the good news in my life, and the good news in your life too, is that God never takes us at face value. Praise God for that, right? If He just looked at our appearance and our good deeds and said, well, it looks like this person doesn't need grace or doesn't need help, He would have just passed over a lot of us, right? But thankfully, He looks beyond that. And He says, I'm going to look at this person's heart. I'm going to look at their brokenness. I'm going to look at their sin. I'm going to look at all the things that they're carrying secretly, and I'm going to show them what they really need. Because what we really need is something on the inside. Now, I knew this as a kid growing up. It's one of the great things about this church is that that's what's taught. The grace of God that trains us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions. This church is very much a grace-based church. But sometimes just our natural inclination is, let's look at what people are doing. Let's just keep focusing on that. And if they're doing things that look good, great. We'll just don't need to worry about those people. And let's just really go over here and, go do our missions trip somewhere else and go do things to the people that clearly look like they need help. And unfortunately, what that does is a lot of times in our churches, we have plenty of people drowning right here. But it just doesn't look like it. So when I got into college, I went beyond just pornography. And now it was being sexual with girls. And I eventually got married believing that would cure me. By the way, it doesn't. You bring whatever your junk is into your marriage. It doesn't magically go away. I was really hoping that this was going to be more like the ring in Lord of the Rings, like there would be something literally magical that would happen when I put it on my fingers, like poof, all this other stuff would just go away and everything would be this wonderful world. It doesn't work that way. And I kept putting it on and off and trying to figure out why doesn't this work? It's not working like the Lord of the Rings. Well, anyway, I brought all of my junk into my marriage. I continued looking at pornography. Eventually, I had multiple affairs and even included prostitution and illegal activities. It got bad. And the thing is, the longer a secret stays a secret, the more sin has a chance to grow because it only grows in the dark. And so over time, this thing just began to completely consume my life and destroy everything around me. That's the other thing, too, is that whatever we're involved in that is sinful, we'd like to think it just affects us, right? We'd like to think that my sin is really, that's just it, right? It's just my sin. It's only going to hurt me and whatever. And even then we kind of deceive ourselves. It's not really hurting me. I'm not hurting anybody. The problem is that anything that we are cultivating in the dark, any sin we're cultivating in the dark, it is already hurting other people. I just wasn't willing to look at that because I was looking at it in terms of, well, if you look at my life externally, even though the facade was starting to crack, it still looked okay. But internally, I was as rotten as a dead man's bones. Eventually, the goodness about the grace of God is that when He saves us, He does not intend to leave us in our current condition. I was saved at 6 years old. And I believe that all of this, yes, was developed in my life as a believer in Jesus Christ. Now, a lot of people, that's hard for them to hear. But the fact of the matter is, one of the aspects of God's grace is that eternal life is a free gift. There's not a qualification on it. Listen, you trust in Jesus Christ, He says free. Eternal life is a free gift. Because it's a gift, guess who gets to choose how to use it? That's part of His grace too. He's saying you can even mishandle this great gift that I've given to you. It's free, but you can sure mess it up. Well, I messed it up because I kept giving myself over to sin more and more and more. Eventually, though, He brought me to my knees. He brought me to the end of me. And one of the ways He did that, actually, was my wife leaving. He used that as a catalyst for waking me up to what I was really doing. And when she left, that brought me to my most broken place. And that's one of the reasons our ministry is named Be Broken Ministries. We believe there is a good aspect to brokenness. That when we finally admit we don't have it all together, we don't know what we're doing, we're making a big mess of this, then we have an attitude of humility and repentance in which God can actually begin to transform us. And that started a process of recovery for me. My wife and I were separated for 9 months. Miraculously, God healed our relationship. My wife is actually sitting right over there today. We've been back together over 14 years. We've been married for almost 19 years. And we have 3 children, and I've been doing this ministry full-time for the last 11 years. I told your students, your kids this morning, I said the good news about whatever we've gotten involved in is that none of it can ever extend farther than the grace of God. So no matter how far you've fallen, no matter how much junk you've gotten involved in, we cannot exhaust the grace of God. It will always extend farther than our sin. That's the good news. And what I want to share with you this morning, or today, is I want to share with you what this problem really looks like. Because really we are talking about pornography. We're talking about some things that are even a little bit beyond that. But if you'll go to the next slide, I want to share with you how big this problem is that we're looking at. Got some statistics up here. And while, yes, statistics can always be manipulated and all that, sometimes they also can reveal the size of the issues that we're dealing with. 93% of boys and 62% of girls are exposed to porn before the age of 18. Lest you think this is a small problem that only affects a small percentage of teenagers, it's not. For those of you who may not be that good at math, that's a majority, like a large majority. 93% of boys and 62% of girls. That means that most teenagers are exposed to pornography. I'm going to pause and let that settle in for a second, because sometimes we don't like hearing that. We want to think, good grief, it can't be that big, right? It is. First exposure to porn among boys is 12 years old. Some other statistics even say that the first time exposure for boys is between the ages of 9 to 11. Also, another statistic that is not on here is that the first time that a man will usually get help for a sexual addiction or a porn addiction is around the age of 35 years old. So think about it. Kids are being exposed to pornography, boys especially, between the ages of 9 and 12. And if they get hooked, they're not dealing with it for 25 years. I'm also wanting to tell you that pornographers know this. Don't believe anything that the pornographers will tell you about, listen, this is adult entertainment. We absolutely want children to be protected. We do not want any of this to fall in the hands of children. Baloney. They know these statistics are public information. They know these stats. And you know what they see? A customer. They are targeting your children. They say if we can get that customer at 10 years old, because the likelihood of a 10-year-old telling their parents that they're looking at porn is pretty low, because it's a terrifying thing. And they know that too. If we can get them hooked on porn at 10, we know we got them at least for 25 years. The majority of them. Because very few will actually get that help at 35 years old. So they're looking at it as a consumer. 71% of teens hide their online behavior from their parents. Let that sink in for a second. Lest you think that you really have all the information about your teenager, 71% of teens hide their online behavior from their parents. Now, I thought about putting paper sacks on the tables so that you could breathe into them and so you don't hyperventilate. My intention here is not to scare you to death. My intention is sort of to peel the curtain back so that you can see the realities of what's going on in teenagers and what they're being introduced to. And a lot of the information that teens are exposed to online, they are purposely hiding from their parents. And we'll get into that a little bit later. 39% of teens have sent or posted sexually suggestive messages. So regardless of just images and things like that, there's sexual banter going on, social networks and things like that. There's sexually suggestive messages. And finally, 83% of boys and 57% of girls have seen group sex online. Now, this statistic reveals to me more about where the porn industry has gone in the last 25 years than just the fact that a majority of teenagers have seen group sex online. When I was a kid, the kind of pornography that was available, first of all, there was a limitation to the amount of porn that I could even get my hands on because, to my kids' shock, the internet was not around when I was in high school and college. So they're just, their eyes get huge when I say that. They're like, you're ancient, you're like a dinosaur. But just trying to get material was difficult. And then the material you could get, even that was limited in terms of the types of porn that were available. It was what we might consider today softcore porn. The degradation scale to which porn has progressed over the last 25 years is astronomical. Not just in the amounts of pornography that's available, but the kinds of pornography that's available. Most porn is violent in nature. Lots of pornography has become very part-oriented. Parts of a body, not a full body, just parts of a body. It's become very gross and totally degrading to the human body and certainly to God and to sexuality. And so the fact that the majority of boys and girls have seen group sex online tells me, yes, it's a terrible thing that they've seen group sex online, but the fact that there's group sex online is disturbing. That there's that kind of pornography that's out there. So what is the most common reaction? I want to share with you some of the most common reactions that I hear from parents in dealing with the issue and in hearing about how big this problem is. A lot of parents, a few of them will actually say this to me, but a lot of parents, I can sense that they're feeling it and they're thinking it. And the reaction is, well, not my kid. This is a huge problem. Like out there's this huge problem, But I know my kid. And I know my child's not they're not part of that 93%, 62%. They're not part of that. Let me remind you of the statistic that says 71% of teens hide their online behavior from their parents. Now, let me say this as a little aside. I do not want you to go out of here today and be the biggest skeptic of your child after you leave here, okay? I don't want you to be cynical toward your children, but I do want you to maybe have a little bit more of an understanding that quite possibly your little angel might be struggling with something. Quite possibly your child could be in these statistics. And if that's the case, and there's a great likelihood that they're somewhere within those statistics, how can you come alongside and help them? Because they may be drowning silently. They may be drowning in a secret. And for you to be able to see just how enormous this problem is, you might be able to come alongside them and sort of offer kind of some leading questions to maybe encourage them to come out of their shell and their secret. Another reaction that I hear from parents is the typical one, which is, okay, we're locking everything down. This kid's going into a purity prison. I'm telling you, they're going to have walls around them. There's no access to anything, not a screen in their life. There's not a boyfriend. There's not a girlfriend. We are locking them down. You could sort of take the Mark Twain approach here, which he believed that when a child turned 13 years old, you should put them in a 50-barrel drum and feed them through a cork hole. And then when they turn 16, you plug up the hole. I'm not suggesting that. We don't need to lock them in prison. But I think that's one of the reactions that a lot of parents have. There's hyperventilating, there's fear, there's panic that's created by seeing how enormous this problem is, and they go, then I just got to cut off every possible avenue that any temptation could come into my kid's life. Well, you better get your 50-barrel drum if you're going to do that. And by the way, even that wouldn't work, because guess what they take into that barrel with them? Their own mind. Whatever they've already been exposed to, whatever they can create in their own minds. Sin is not something that comes at us externally. It's something that we're told is it wells up in the own deceit of our own hearts. So this isn't about locking every single aspect of the avenues of possible temptation in your kid's life. It better be about something different. Another reaction that I see is just the normal reactions like shock and disgust and sadness. We should have, I believe, kind of an emotional response to the reality of just how depraved our culture has gotten, just how disgusting and degrading pornography is. And then also, a lot of parents react, what do I do? What do I do? And that gets us to this question. What's the most important thing when dealing with porn and sexuality with your kids? Like, if I could boil it all down to like when you're trying to navigate your children through this season of life, of adolescence, what is the foundation of that journey? The next slide tells us. Grace and truth. Grace and truth. We're told in John chapter 1 that when Christ came to the earth, he was the glory of the Father, full of grace and truth. Now, this is very much the Sunday school answer, but it's correct. What do you need to bring to bear in navigating your children through this season of adolescence? You need to bring Jesus Christ. Because guess what? You and I, we are not wise enough. We're not strong enough. We can't do it. If you think that that you have what it takes in yourself to navigate your child through adolescence, then you know what? There needs to be some humility. You need to have a conversation with God where you're broken and you repent of that, because the bottom line is none of us have what it takes to offer our children in and of ourselves what they need in order to grow up into godly men and women. Because if we think about it, what is our actual job here? I believe our actual job as parents is to train them up. I don't believe it's a good idea for us to have the mindset that many in our culture do, which is saying, how can I make my kids happy? How can I make them happy right now? I have no interest in that. Not that I'm saying I want my kids to be miserable. My job, I believe, as a parent, is how can I train this child into a godly man of purity, into a godly woman of purity. Because guess what? The majority, for most of them, guess what the majority of their life is going to be spent in? Adulthood. Childhood is a very short period of time. And this adolescence piece is a very critical part of that journey. It's really where they turn from a boy or a girl into a man or a woman. So I believe we need to have that goal in mind. And if we have that goal in mind, then I think the foundation of that is grace and truth. Because Jesus, that's what he was full of. And so we need to be full of him to bring that to bear with our children. I want to share with you a story that was part of Jesus' ministry that kind of illustrates this idea of what does it look like to bring grace and truth into a very difficult season of life or a very difficult situation. In John chapter 8, there was a story where it says the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who'd been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women, so what do you say?" Now before I go on, I always am curious about where the dude was in this, right? Yeah, let's bring the woman out here. We throw this woman out here. Forget about the sin that the guy committed, right? So there's already all kinds of problems with their setup. So they're already trying to bring the letter of the law to only one aspect of the problem. And by the way, that's one of the things that needs to be highlighted here. Many times when the scribes and the Pharisees would confront Jesus, they were bringing only the letter of the law. Whereas Jesus kept trying to expose to us the heart of the law. See, these guys were saying, we're clinging to the law of Moses in a way that can manipulate and control and punish people. What Jesus ultimately demonstrates is, listen, the law of Moses was given so that you could see the heart of God. Is that he wants to protect and love and grow his people. Not punish them, control them, and manipulate them. So Jesus' response is interesting. He bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. That's an odd response to a question, right? Imagine this lady's tossed in front of Jesus, and they say, okay, we caught this woman in the act of adultery, so the law says we should stone her. What do you say? I would love to know what he was writing. We don't know that, and I won't even speculate on it. But just the response was weird, right? Start doodling in the sand. It almost feels like he's ignoring the question. But I think one of the things that he is doing that's very instructional to us is he is pausing in the midst of this heated circumstance, right? You can imagine the emotions. You can imagine the shame of this woman, and you can imagine the anger and rage of these men. Not necessarily toward the woman, but toward Jesus. They're going to try to catch him. And I think sometimes it's good to pause when you find out your daughter's pregnant. I think sometimes it's good to pause when you discover that your son's been looking at porn. If you need to doodle in the ground, that's fine. Do whatever you got to do. But sometimes take a deep breath. Because what happens next, and as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. Take another pause. All right, let's evaluate the situation here. I'm perfectly comfortable with your solution as long as the first one to pick up the stone has no sin. Now, let me take a pause and let you think about that. And then what happens? But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you, but listen to this. Go, and from now on sin no more." Jesus was full of grace and truth. He wasn't bipolar. It wasn't grace or truth. It wasn't like, today is going to be a grace day, and then tomorrow is going to be a truth day. No, he was full of grace and truth. And I think this is really important. I can't overstate how important this is in terms of what we bring to bear on our children when they're struggling with these sexual purity issues. Is because it's really easy, and a lot of parents, it's easy to get locked into the truth side. Kind of like the scribes and the Pharisees. You were caught. Here's the lines. Let's punish. Instead, what Jesus says, he pauses, he bends down in the dirt, and he says, "Parent, let's take a look into your life. Are you without sin? Are you going to cast a stone at your guilty child?" And I love what Jesus does here. He basically offers grace and truth to this woman. He says, "I'm not going to condemn you," even though, guess what? Of every single person standing in that crowd that day, he's the only one that had a right to pick up a stone because he was without sin. But yet he said, "I'm choosing not to give you what you do deserve. Instead, I'm going to invite you into a truth that you get there by grace." He said, "I'm not going to condemn you, but I am going to give you an instruction. Go from this place and sin no more." You know what? I would imagine that that woman had a catch in her spirit and a catch in her decision the next time she might have been tempted to commit adultery. And not because somebody locked her in a purity prison, and not because somebody beat her over the head with the law of Moses, but because somebody was willing to extend grace to her. The God of the universe was willing to say, "I actually have the right to pick up a stone, but I'm not going to do it. But I am going to call you into a life of purity and away from adultery by that same grace." So we need grace and truth. Thanks for being with us this week on the Pure Sex Radio broadcast. A resource that I want to share with you that might be helpful in assisting your kids in navigating through the adolescent years is a book called Talking to Your Kids About Sex by Dr. Mark Laaser. That's Laaser. You can get this book on Amazon.com or pretty much anywhere that books are sold. But it's a great book that just kind of helps you navigate through these years with your kids to know what their needs are emotionally, spiritually, and then what you can expect even sexually in their development and how you can approach it from a biblical perspective. Again, the book is Talking to Your Kids About Sex by Dr. Mark Laaser. We're glad you've been with us, and we look forward to having you back here again next week on the Pure Sex Radio broadcast.
Pure Sex Radio is paid for by Be Broken Ministries. Visit us online at puresexradio.com.